once in a while, a number of us come across a game that we just don't necessarily take to right away. Whether or not that game or series is good doesn't matter so much as the presentation and the first impressions that it left us when we first played it. This means that we could potentially look over a good game because something about it just didn't sit well with us. For example, the Monster Hunter franchise can be daunting to a new player because of its giant monsters, the thought and need for strategy, and even the concept of teamwork as a whole. It's always a good idea to give a game a second look even after a slightly negative impression, as there are likely qualities about the game that make up for those bad impressions. Sort of like diamonds in the rough, if you will. In my case, such a game was Fire Emblem, Path of Radiance for the Nintendo GameCube. I remember getting this game shortly after its release in October of 2005, and I certainly remember the impression that it left me. See, back then I was much more into the adventure, puzzle-solving genres like The Legend of Zelda, so back when I played the game for the first time, I received a major slap in the face for being such an idiot and assuming that those series were in any way related. The first thing that threw me off was the top-down, almost chess-like approach that the game had. This gave me flashbacks to Yu-Gi-Oh! The False-Bound Kingdom, a game that bored the ever-living hell out of me as a kid. Then there was an incident early on that caused one of my characters to die in combat. I thought, no big deal, I'll just get him back at the end for the next map.
What a dumbass!
It was then that I realized that the game was beginning to get hard really quickly. I was down a character and I had no idea what I was doing. It wasn't long before I put the game aside and didn't touch it for around a year. When I did eventually pick it up again, I was amazed on just how I was able to cast this game aside so quickly. And from there, just as quickly as I put Path of Radiance aside, it began to become one of my favorite games of all time, leading up to where we are now. And now I'm going to share the experience to all of you watching today. Despite the glamorous look on the GameCube, Path of Radiance is actually the 9th title of the Fire Emblem series, as well as one of the first titles released in North America, with the preceding games being Fire Emblem, the Blazing Sword, and Fire Emblem, the Sacred Stones. Interestingly, the Blazing Sword was the first Fire Emblem game to be released outside Japan, and therefore was just called Fire Emblem, which was likely to prevent confusion over the previous titles then restricted to Japan. Something else worth noting is that Path of Radiance was the first game in the series to be brought to a console since the Japan-only Fire Emblem Thracia 776 on the SNES in 1999. Like its predecessors, this particular game in the series does follow its own setting unrelated to the first game. However, unlike its predecessors, Path of Radiance is the first to be sporting a three-dimensional look as well as voice acting. The last difference, and probably my favorite difference as a whole, was that the characters in focus are much different compared to the previous titles. Most games in the Fire Emblem series focused on royalty as the protagonists, where a neighboring country suddenly invades because of some evil force or the king of the enemy country just wants to be a douchebag. In Path of Radiance, the focus is turned towards a mercenary group in the country of Crimea. No, not that Crimea. This Crimea. The group is led by Grail, a well-respected man with a really mean axe swing. As the story starts, it's learned that he's training his son Ike to be a full-fledged member of the mercenary group. After a few rounds of smacking each other with practice swords, Grail finally allows Ike to join the mercenary company, and over the next few days, Ike goes from place to place fulfilling contracts to stop a bunch of jackasses from raiding small towns. A couple weeks later, the mage Soren rejoins the mercenary company after being at the Crimean capital with grave news that the country of Dan has invaded Crimea. After a confrontation outside the Crimean capital, the Grail mercenaries encounter a woman known as Alencia, who claims to be the sole heir of the Crimean kingdom. Skepticism about Alencia's birthright come into question since the king and queen were not known to have any children, but she explains that her existence was kept secret to prevent a blood feud as the king's brother, Lord Renning, was the next in line to the throne. Think of it like the Lion King, only without Scar betraying Mufasa because he was a whining bitch that wanted his way. To seal Alencia's claim to the throne, the Grail mercenaries are attacked by Dan's soldiers at their headquarters, forcing the mercenaries to curve stomp the soldiers and flee to the neighboring country of Gallia, home to the Laguz of the Beast Tribe. The Laguz are shapeshifters that can transform from their human form to an animal, and the tribes themselves are broken up into three major categories: beasts, birds, and dragons. While in Gallia, the Grail mercenaries encounter two of Dane's four riders, outlandishly powerful people that serve as the nation's top generals. One of these generals is known as the Black Knight, because you can't have a medieval-style game without having at least one fucking Black Knight. Despite lacking a horse of any description, the Black Knight comes in only to tell his fellow rider, Petrine, to withdraw, then takes the time to stare at Grail to what has to amount to a very uncomfortable amount of time. That night, however, both Grail and the Black Knight find themselves dueling out in the middle of a clearing, with Ike watching in horror as his father gets impaled under the full moon. The Black Knight was in fact looking for something that belonged to Grail, but that didn't stop Ike from rushing in and getting his ass kicked. The roar from the off-screen Galleon King drives off the Black Knight, and the rest of the Grail mercenaries are left to grieve for a short time before being confronted by more Daean troops. When the Grail mercenaries head off to the Galleon capital, they are troubled to learn that the Galleon King, Cineas, cannot provide asylum for Elysia due to the fact that there is an unhealthy amount of racism going on between the humans, known as Bayorks, and the Laguz. Honestly, having a world filled with the oh-so-lovely racism should have been expected, but for the life of me I never understood how the Laguz can be sold into slavery when they can just shapeshift and eat the motherfuckers oppressing them. Thankfully, the King of Beasts happened to be friends with both the Crimean King as well as Grail, so Cineas helps fund the Grail mercenaries to head to the country of Benyon to raise an army to take on Daean. From there, the mercenaries find their way on an adventure, making allies, slaughtering armies, and finding jolly old fat men that just happen to be involved with an illegal slave trade. After Ike wins over the Benyon Apostle, he becomes appointed both Lord and General of the Crimean Liberation Army, complete with a whole new look. With an army at his disposal, Ike leads to defeat Daean in an all-out war in both the Daean homeland as well as Crimea, where the Mad King Ashnard now resides since the invasion. Along the way, Ashnard's plan slowly begins to unfold. See, Ike's younger sister Mist happens to hold a very special medallion. This particular medallion is believed to house a dark god of sorts, destined to destroy the world should it be awakened. The medallion itself glows in a fabulous blue light as the continent slowly begins to be engulfed in war, which gives it the nickname the Fire Emblem. The Fire Emblem must be contained within the hands of a person that has perfect balance of the soul, otherwise that person would go insane and kill everyone they find. You know, just like forcing a well-formed bodybuilder to watch the Twilight Saga for 10 days straight. Though Mist can safely contain the Fire Emblem, it is soon stolen by a traitor and presented to Ashnard. How did the thief not go crazy? He wrapped it in a cloth. The Dark God of Destruction, everyone. Beaten by cheap fabric. Despite this, the Liberation Army presses forward, with Ike gaining respect of the Laguz royals, taking down the Daean capital, and besting the Black Knight in battle in Crimea. From there, the army heads to the Crimean capital, where Ashnard awaits to get his ass handed to him by Ike. Or if you're playing the game on hard mode, Ashnard uses the Fire Emblem to gain more power, and possibly cause the players to piss themselves. After the battle, Elysia is crowned queen and the country of Crimea starts to rebuild, but there are many questions that are still left unanswered. A couple of the major questions that go unanswered involve the Fire Emblem itself, including, what is the nature of the Dark God within it? What sort of power does it possess? What was the Black Knight's identity? To what extent did his connection with Grail go? And one of the lesser talked about questions, what was the full story of the previous Benyon Empress's assassination, and why did it result in the massacre of the Heron tribe? Sadly, these questions aren't answered within this game, but in a realistic sense, not all the questions arising from an event go answered. That is, until the sequel Radiant Dawn comes out. The presentation in Path of Radiance is certainly a step up from previous titles. Typically, there's a brief overview of the world before going straight into the action with one nation attacking another, but here there is a build to the chaos ahead. Instead of fancy prince and princesses, we start out with humble mercenaries who are also affected from the Daean invasion. We lead our army with an inexperienced son of a former Daean rider who has no reputation to bank off of, gradually earning the respect of several nations. This is what you would call good pacing, as well as good character development. To be fair, the other games in the series do have decent pacing, but they tend to throw the player directly into the action without a real clue as to what's going on. Here, it is widely known that the countries of Daean and Crimea had a bunch of tension building up, and as the story progresses, more evidence helps support this tension, such as Crimea's efforts to help strengthen ties with the Laguz nations, along with Daeans' racist views towards them. And most importantly, the war between the nations does not start off right away. The player gets to experience minor skirmishes to help build an idea of how the world works around them before all hell breaks loose. Let's not also forget that unlike the Demon King in the Sacred Stones or the Dragons in Blazing Sword, the Dark God is actually prevented from escaping the Fire Emblem and causing havoc. Yeah, there are similar elements presented in Path of Radiance that came from its predecessors, but here there's a different spin on the formula. Because of this, I can easily say that this game is by far my favorite in the series. Now that we have the story covered, let's talk about the game itself. Fire Emblem as a series focuses on a top-down, real-time strategy approach. Actually, I would say that the whole RTS approach is much more loose here than typical RTS games, as there is more of an emphasis on turn-based combat. If you want a better idea, think of it like a massive chess game. Units come in different classes, each has their own characteristics, including varied movements, strengths, and weaknesses. In fact, a more intricate chess game would probably be the best way to describe the Fire Emblem series. Each map contains an objective of some sort in order to complete it. These include seizing a specific point, arriving to a destination, defending a point, escaping the area, routing the enemy army, surviving a number of turns, or killing the boss of that map. Each map has their own boss that is significantly stronger than the other enemy units, so it's always a good idea to scope out the boss first and develop a strategy beforehand in order to take him or her down. You can take down almost every boss with any character you like, so long as they have the equipment and skills necessary to do so. All characters can carry a number of weapons and items to help dish out the pain while keeping themselves healed. Weapons come in a number of varieties, and a unit can only use a certain type of weapon pertaining to their class. Weapons have a number of characteristics too, ranging from the weak iron sword to the much stronger steel blade, or ranged weapons that can attack from a distance like bow or magic. Both regular weapons and magic have something called the weapons triangle, a graph that shows what weapons have an advantage over another. Think of it like the 3 starters in the Pokemon series. What you use has a type advantage and a weakness. The only exception are the bow users, as they can only attack indirectly, leaving them vulnerable to a direct attack. Personally, I think that the weapons triangle is only useful when considering them at the beginning of the game, because in the later half, your team is likely to be so pimped out that the reduced accuracy and attack power means almost nothing in the long run. When attacking an enemy, a menu pops up and shows the outcome of the fight, including health, attack power, the number of attacks that can be done in that assault, as well as the percentage of accuracy and critical hit chance. Whether or not you succeed all depends on how you look at the outcome of the fights. Character deaths are very punishing here. If they die, they're gone for good. Some of you might not really care about character deaths because during combat, characters don't typically have lines of dialogue. That is reserved for both story as well as the base preparation screen. Before each fight, you can outfit your characters with weapons and skills, as well as bonus experience points that you received after most chapters. There is also a series of support conversations between characters. You're limited to a total of 5 conversations with each character, and the people that character interacts with has to be on the same map within a certain number of spaces. Your reward for doing this is a brief conversation between 2 characters that not only lets you get to know them a bit better, but you also get stat bonuses for future battles while those 2 characters are within 3 spaces of each other. There's almost always a reward for going out of your way to look into something, be it a weapon from a home, stat boost from a support conversation, items and tips from the info section, a little extra experience from a farther off enemy, or even a recruitable unit. It's these sort of things that make a game fun, being rewarded for either being curious or just wanting to know a little bit more about the surrounding environment. Just about every map gives you an opportunity to get an extra unit that you may use to fight by your side. These units can either be on independent teams, working for the enemy, found in 3-star infos during base preparation, or join during the chapter automatically. In the case of Stefan, however, you need to be on a very specific space with either the Laguz Lethe or Mordecai for him to join your team. For recruitable units on the enemy or independent teams, you would need to go up to them with a specific character and talk to them. Just make sure you don't accidentally attack them if they're on the opposing team, psycho. You can continue getting more recruitable units up to the end of the game, but that sort of goes against the concept of the whole characters with actual personalities this series is known for. What I mean is that there are certain characters, such as Largo or Nasir, join your forces so late in the game that it's almost pointless, since there's not a whole lot to be had from them. Still, it does add to the fact that your team can be adjusted along the way for battles, which helps add for replayability. Another thing to note is that when a unit reaches level 21, their level resets and their class changes. Units that class up get a surge of stat boosts, and in many cases they gain other benefits like the ability to use a new weapon. The only units that don't class up are the Laguz. In fact, let's jump into them really quick since I suck at good transitions. Laguz come in two forms, their human form and their animal form. They change forms automatically when their transformation gauge reaches full capacity or when it's completely empty. They gain and lose transformation points depending on the form they are currently in at the start of the turn, as well as when they are attacked. A transformed Laguz can really tear apart an enemy in a few hits, which makes them pretty reliable. Conversely, a Laguz in human form cannot counterattack, and their stats are so low that more often than not an attacking unit can get in 2 hits instead of 1. As a result, a lot of caution is preferred when bringing Laguz on your team at the start of the battle. The maps for each chapter are, for lack of a better term, fairly similar to one another in terms of what sort of things are lying around. Some maps have standard terrain, while others might have terrain that slows down units like knights or cavalry. Many maps have chests and doors that can be opened with keys or with a thief that may or may not be lying around. There are a few maps with ballista that can shoot from absurd distances, making it so caution is again preferred. And last but certainly not least, all maps have a smorgasbord of enemies waiting to get their asses handed to them. That's one thing I should really get into about this game. Even on its lowest difficulty, Path of Radiance can be hard as hell. Yet on easy mode, which I did for my Let's Play, still offered a reasonable challenge that is just about right for any game to have. On normal and hard modes, that difficulty fucking skyrockets. On top of more enemies that want to anally probe you with sharp objects, they also have increased stats and experience gains are very minimal. Let me make this clear. The level of assholeness should be expected from a step up in difficulty, but when you get less experience from each kill, you are borderlining the realms of impossibility. Not only that, but there are some maps that get something extra to further put emphasis on the fuck you aspect the player receives, such as maps that have view impending fog or how Ashnard will actively hunt the player down at the end of the game instead of just staying put, waiting to be violated in ways one should be taken to court for. Ashnard on hard mode brings one last dickhead move that really should not be too unexpected, as he will take hold of the Fire Emblem and become even harder to kill. Holy hell, the higher difficulties of this game could perhaps reach Dark Souls levels, but I don't hate myself enough for a full playthrough on hard mode. Easy mode doesn't have many asshole moments, but the one that really stands out is the fight against the Black Knight. Mist comes out of nowhere to be Ike's healer, and if you don't have her level maxed out, then the reinforcements will make short work of her if she doesn't escape the area. Not only that, but in order to defeat the Black Knight, Ike must have the sword Regnilla equipped to damage him, and he must have the skill Aether in order to defeat him. If you don't have both of them, you're not beating the Black Knight, especially since you only have a limited number of turns to defeat him before Nasir comes in to sacrifice himself to save everyone. Moving on from the nightmare that is Path of Radiance's asshole moments, this game looks fantastic. This is one of the few Fire Emblem games to have a 3D look and remains one of the best looking games of the franchise. The animations are smooth and fluid, and the game battle animations are just gorgeous. There is little that really goes against this game in terms of look and presentation, but if I had to choose one, it would be that character dialogue and animated cutscenes are just a bit too quiet. The dialogue may be a bit low, but that still beats the characters sounding like they have a case of cottonmouth, like in Radiant Dawn. To complement the look, the game also has one of the best soundtracks in the series as well, each one fitting a certain mood, with my favorites being Wonderful Pirates, Decisive Attack, Brave King, Brave General, as well as the theme for the Black Knight. Would I recommend this game to a new player? Hell yes! This game isn't just wonderful, it's also challenging. Now granted, this game is certainly not for everyone. The Fire Emblem series is more known as a story-driven game, and to those that just want to be content with mindless slaughter, the story will only distract them. Not only that, but the gameplay is more unconventional than most, and it takes a wanting and willing mindset to get the most out of not just this game, but for every game in the Fire Emblem series. This game gives back just as much as you put into it, and that is something that I personally appreciate. This game will make you think. You have to use your brain in order to complete each map without casualties, and you're rewarded for doing so. The game does punish you for taking needless risks, but in cases like those, it's likely the player's fault, as they either didn't bring the right gear, upgrade the right units, or fail to analyze the opponent, all of which the game offers. One of the most important things to remember about this game is that once you have a team, you really have to stick to using it, as grinding for experience is almost non-existent here. You could swap one unit out for another in case your current units aren't up to par, but if you do that to your whole team, you will only suffer for it. With a vast assortment of units at your disposal and the support conversations to unlock, many replays could even be expected. In fact, you'll even be rewarded for playing through this game multiple times. Upon your first completion of Path of Radiance, you gain access to the Extras menu, where you can play some extra maps and unlock previous enemies as playable units with enough replays. I will say that of all the games I've played from beginning to end, Path of Radiance is the game that I go back to the most. I went back to this game so much that I have save files across 3 different memory cards, each with over 5 playthroughs. This game certainly earns its runtime, and that's for sure. If you have this game and haven't gotten around to playing it, then by all means, stop this video, close the Pornhub window, and play it. If you don't have this game, I suggest snagging the nearest one at the lowest price you can find, as the game, along with Radiant Dawn, are considered rare and prices can go up beyond $100, $200 if it's factory new. Enthralling story, great gameplay, and the rarity of this game makes Fire Emblem Path of Radiance a gem by merely owning it. If you want to experience a challenge that is just about right for any game, play it on easy. I won't judge. If you want to step it up and experience the horrors of normal and hard mode, be sure to consult a psychiatrist first before doing so. With that said, this has been Regnilla, wishing you to have fun and to take care.